My wife admitted to cheating with an online ex after I confessed my curiosity about sharing. Now what? Hey Reddit. I never imagined I'd find myself in a situation like this. My wife and I have been married for 6 years, and while every marriage has its ups and downs, I thought we had a strong connection. We've always been honest with each other, or at least I thought so. That belief has been shaken to its core in the past few weeks, and I'm left questioning everything about us. It all started during a deep, late-night conversation. You know, the kind where you let your guard down and talk about things you normally wouldn't bring up. We were sipping wine on the couch, and the topic of fantasies came up. My wife asked me about mine, and after some hesitation, I admitted I had a curiosity about sharing or cuckolding. It wasn't something I had ever planned to act on, more of a passing thought I'd read about online. I thought being open with her would strengthen our bond, not tear it apart. At first, she didn't react much. She just nodded and said it was interesting. The conversation moved on, and I didn't think much of it. But over the next few days, I noticed she seemed distant. She was on her phone a lot more than usual, and I caught her smiling at her screen once or twice. I brushed it off, assuming she was chatting with friends or scrolling through social media. A week later, we had another deep conversation. This time, she dropped a bombshell. She admitted she had been messaging an ex, someone she'd never met in person but had an online relationship with years ago. She confessed that the messages had turned flirtatious, even sexual. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. She told me she felt compelled to tell me after our conversation about fantasies, like it gave her permission to open up about her actions. She assured me it was only online, that she'd never physically cheated, but it didn't feel any less painful. She said she ended it as soon as she realized how guilty she felt, but the damage was done. I didn't know how to react. On one hand, I appreciated her honesty. On the other, I felt betrayed. The fact that she'd been hiding this from me, even if it was only online, hurt more than I expected. I asked her why she felt the need to message him in the first place. She said she didn't know, that it started innocently but escalated before she realized it. I spent the next few days in a haze, replaying everything in my head. Was it my fault for bringing up the sharing fantasy? Did I somehow plant the idea in her head that this was okay? Or had she already been talking to him and used my confession as an excuse to come clean? When I confronted her again, she was defensive. She insisted it didn't mean anything, that she loved me and had no intention of pursuing anything further with this guy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. I started to overanalyze everything. Was she truly sorry, or was she just trying to ease her own guilt? Was I overreacting, or did this count as a real betrayal? And what about my own confession? Did my curiosity about sharing open a door I wasn't prepared to walk through? I tried to focus on the positives. She did come clean, even though she could have kept it hidden. She says she loves me and wants to work through this. But the trust I had in her feels shattered, and I don't know how to rebuild it. To complicate things further, I started to question my own feelings about the fantasy I shared. Was it something I genuinely wanted to explore, or was it just a fleeting thought that got blown out of proportion? Part of me wondered if her confession was an opportunity to test the waters in a safe way. Another part of me recoiled at the idea, feeling like it would only deepen the wound. We've had several long talks since then. She's apologized multiple times and promised to be completely transparent moving forward. She even offered to show me her messages with this guy, though I declined. I wasn't sure I could handle seeing the details. But despite her efforts, I still feel a distance between us. I've been reading a lot about emotional affairs and the impact they can have on a relationship. Some articles say they're just as damaging as physical affairs, while others argue they're easier to recover from. I don't know where we fall on that spectrum. One of my biggest fears is that this isn't the end of it. If she was able to cross this line once, what's stopping her from doing it again? And if I can't fully trust her, how can we move forward? On the flip side, I also have to examine my own role in this. Was sharing my fantasy a mistake? Did I unintentionally give her the green light to explore something she was already tempted by? Or was her behavior completely separate from my confession? I've thought about going to therapy, either alone or as a couple. Maybe a professional could help us untangle this mess and figure out where to go from here. But part of me wonders if therapy is just a band-aid, a way to delay the inevitable. Some days, I feel like we can get through this, that our love is strong enough to overcome the betrayal. Other days, I'm not so sure. I catch myself imagining life without her, wondering if it would be easier to start fresh with someone new. But then I remember all the good times we've shared, and I'm reminded of why I fell in love with her in the first place. I haven't told anyone else about this. It feels too personal, too messy to share with friends or family. I don't want them to judge her or me. That's why I'm here, spilling my guts to strangers on the internet, hoping for some clarity. If you've been in a similar situation, how did you handle it? Can a relationship survive something like this, or is the trust too broken to repair? Should I give her another chance, or is this a sign that we've reached the end of the road? Right now, I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads with no idea which path to take. All I know is that I still love my wife, despite everything. But love alone might not be enough to fix what's broken. Update. A week later, after sharing my story here, I decided to take some of the advice many of you gave and take a step back to process everything. That week was one of the longest of my life. My wife and I continued living together, but there was this heavy silence hanging over us. Every interaction felt tense, like we were both walking on eggshells. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my mind. I kept thinking about how she admitted to messaging her ex and whether her confession was genuine or calculated. I also couldn't shake the feeling that my own curiosity about sharing might have played a role in this mess. It was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, confusion, sadness, and, strangely, hope. During that time, I avoided making any impulsive decisions. I focused on myself, going for long walks, hitting the gym, and even journaling my thoughts. It helped clear my head a little, but the questions about my marriage were always there, lingering in the background. Midweek, my wife approached me and suggested we have a serious talk. She said she wanted to answer any questions I had and to be as honest as possible. I agreed, and we sat down at the dining table, facing each other like strangers. I asked her why she felt the need to reconnect with her online ex. She said she didn't have a clear answer but felt it stemmed from unresolved feelings of validation. She admitted she enjoyed the attention but swore it didn't mean she loved me any less. Hearing that didn't make it easier to swallow, but I appreciated her honesty. Then I asked the hardest question: if I hadn't brought up my fantasy, would she have still confessed? She hesitated, and I could tell she was choosing her words carefully. She said my confession made her feel like we were in a safe space to share secrets but admitted she might not have come clean otherwise. That hurt more than I expected. After the conversation, I felt even more conflicted. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her at her word and work on moving forward. But another part of me couldn't shake the nagging doubts. What if there were more she wasn't telling me? What if this wasn't the whole story? I realized I needed time to figure out what I truly wanted. I also started thinking about the concept of forgiveness. Could I forgive her, not just for what she did, but for the damage it caused to my trust? I wasn't sure if I was ready to take that step yet, but I knew it was something I'd have to face eventually. Another update. A month later, after the initial conversation, I suggested we try couples therapy. My wife agreed immediately, which gave me some hope. If she was willing to put in the work, maybe there was a chance for us to move past this. The first few sessions were awkward. Sitting across from a stranger and airing our dirty laundry felt strange and uncomfortable. But the therapist was skilled at creating a safe space for us to communicate. She helped us dig into the root causes of what happened, and some of the revelations were tough to hear. One of the things that came up was my wife's dissatisfaction with certain aspects of our marriage, things she had never expressed before. She said she sometimes felt like we were going through the motions and that the connection we had early in our relationship had faded. Hearing that was a gut punch, but it also made me realize I hadn't been as attentive to our relationship as I should have been. At the same time, the therapist called her out for her lack of boundaries and how her actions crossed a line. She explained that emotional cheating, even online, can be just as damaging as physical cheating. My wife acknowledged this and said she was committed to making amends. In therapy, I also explored my feelings about the fantasy I had shared. I realized that it wasn't something I truly wanted to pursue, it was more of a fleeting curiosity that had been blown out of proportion. That realization lifted some of the guilt I had been carrying, but it didn't erase the pain of what had happened. We also started doing small things to reconnect, like going on weekly date nights and setting aside time to talk without distractions. It felt good to laugh and enjoy each other's company again, but there were still moments when the hurt would bubble up, and I'd find myself questioning if we could ever fully recover. There were also moments in therapy where I felt resentful. I realized I was doing a lot of the emotional heavy lifting to rebuild something she broke. While I understood that healing was a shared effort, it didn't feel entirely fair. It was a tough pill to swallow, but the therapist reminded me that progress requires both people to take ownership of their roles. Outside of therapy, I leaned on books and articles about rebuilding trust. I learned about creating new shared experiences and finding ways to reignite intimacy. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I felt some cracks in the wall I'd built around myself begin to mend. Final update. 6 months later, it's been 6 months since my wife's confession, and a lot has changed. After months of therapy, hard conversations, and self-reflection, we've reached a turning point in our marriage. First, let me say this: Rebuilding trust is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It's not something that happens overnight, and it requires constant effort from both people. There were days when I felt like giving up, days when I questioned if it was worth it, and days when I wondered if I'd ever feel the same way about my wife again. But slowly, things started to improve. My wife has been transparent in ways she never was before. She shares her phone with me willingly, not because I ask, but because she wants to prove she has nothing to hide. She's gone out of her way to make me feel secure, and I can tell she genuinely regrets her actions. Neve also had to work on myself. Therapy helped me understand that while her actions were not my fault, there were areas in our marriage where I had been neglectful. I've made a conscious effort to be more present, more communicative, and more attentive to her needs. We've also had deeper conversations about our relationship, our goals, and our boundaries. One of the most important things we agreed on was the need for mutual respect and honesty moving forward. We both know that another breach of trust would likely be the end of us. There are still moments when I think about what happened and feel a pang of sadness or anger. But those moments are becoming less frequent, and I'm learning to focus on the progress we've made instead of the pain of the past. Healing isn't linear, but it's happening, one step at a time. We've also started creating new traditions, like trying new activities together or planning trips we've always talked about. These experiences have helped us build a stronger bond and remind us of why we chose each other in the first place. It's not about erasing the past but about creating a new chapter we can both be proud of. For anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, my advice is to take your time and listen to your gut. Healing is not linear, and it's okay to have doubts along the way. Whether you choose to stay or walk away, make sure it's a decision you can live with. As for us, we're still a work in progress, but we're moving forward together. And for now, that's enough.